Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all so much for joining. My name is Dalia Mogahed, and I'm the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. This is the fourth and final webinar in our series on new research for community conversations. Today's topic is absolutely essential and oftentimes overlooked. An estimated 61 million adults in the United States live with a disability, and roughly 1 in 4 adults in the US have some type of disability. Thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act, American law prohibits, quote, discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, public accommodations, communications, and access to state and local government programs and services. And though the law goes a long way to protect the rights of people with disabilities, in countries that don't have these kinds of laws, things are very different. The lived realities of families with members with disabilities are rarely centered when we discuss the American Muslim community. So to address this gap, ISPU included the topic on its American Muslim poll in 2020. And this is a nationally representative poll of Americans with different faiths, including Muslims, as well as Americans of no faith. This research, though, is just a first step in addressing the needs of Muslims with disabilities. We're also going to be hearing about research that MUHSEN, the organization MUHSEN, conducted with families with family members or who have themselves are living with disabilities. Community leaders cannot afford to ignore the needs of this segment of any community and should start by listening to the impacted members to learn how faith spaces can better meet their needs. And we hope to really catalyze this conversation and amplify this conversation today during this webinar. I'm so excited to introduce our panel. But before I do, I'm just going to share with you some of the research that we've conducted on with the American Muslim community regarding Muslims with disability. So I am sharing my screen, and the first, sort of just to set the stage, the first thing that we learned by doing research on American Muslims regarding disability is that nearly a third of all American Muslims, as well as families of any other faith and no faith, have a family member with a disability, who live with a disability. Now, why I'm saying this right off the bat is a third of our community is a very large segment. So we simply can't ignore Muslims with disabilities. We can't build mosques where this is not considered. We can't create programming where we're not thinking about this. This is a significant and important segment of our community. If you think about it, a third of our community is a larger percentage than the percentage of Muslims who are Arab, or the percentage of Muslims who are South Asian. It would be, to erase one entire segment of our community by ignoring them. It's really equal, same as not considering Muslims with disabilities in our conversations about American Muslims. Now, when asked in our survey, most Muslims believe that their community accommodates the needs of those with disabilities. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, but what we have as sort of the baseline is that Muslims are as likely as Jewish Americans and Catholics and Protestants to say that their faith community accommodates the needs of people living with disabilities. It's not 100%, so there's always room to grow, but Muslims are not too different from other communities. The other thing to note is that when we compare families that have a member of their family living with a disability and those who do not, this number is actually the same for both groups, which actually for me, as the person who looked at this data or analyzed it for the report, surprised me. I thought that the numbers would be different. People who are, experiencing the issue themselves might have a different point of view, but in fact, the two groups were the same. So if you'd like to learn more, please join our mailing list at ispu.org to get our latest research right into your inbox, and check out our website where you can learn more about the views and behaviors of American Muslims at ispu.org/poll. And now we're going to hear from Joohi, who I'll introduce and then ask her to come on camera. And Joohi's going to be sharing fascinating research that the organization she founded, MUHSEN, conducted. Joohi is co-founder and executive director of MUHSEN. As a graduate from Boston University with a degree in business management and having spent over 20 years excelling in the corporate world, speaking globally about strategies in the marketing field, Joohi turned her talents to become a national advocate for Muslims with disabilities. This led her to be the co-founder with Sheikh Omar Suleiman of MUHSEN. And she is also the appointed executive director of the organization. MUHSEN stands for Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs. And with that, I will turn the floor to Joohi, who will go through the research, and I'll help with the slides, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Dalia, for, first of all, the invitation to be part of this really wonderful panel. I always like to say, in order to have a voice, in order to be empowered, in order to be a community that's included, we have to have a seat at the table first. And this is, mashallah, a seat at the table. I commend the work of ISPU, and I've told Dalia since the first day I met her that we really need to dig deeper into this community. And as you just heard in the opening, these are not few people that we're speaking of. These are a lot of people in our community that we're speaking of. And, my background professionally aside, I basically fell into this world when I became a parent to now an adult daughter with disability. So with that, I want to say that what was really important when we founded the organization MUHSEN, Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs, was that we did not build an organization, another nonprofit, another Muslim nonprofit for just awareness. And one of the key things was, what are we going to do with the awareness? We need to raise awareness, but at the same time, we need to act on it and make a difference on the ground. A lot of what we're doing is very grassroots, and what's directing the work of the organization to support and empower people with disabilities is actually, some of the research that I'm going to take you through today. Very, very high level, some key points. MUHSEN did a study. We have a needs assessment survey that is out there and that is distributed, and basically the method with which people can access it, there is a link on the MUHSEN website for families, for caregivers, for individuals themselves who live with disability, and they can go through and answer the survey questions, a lot of which there is some demographic information about who they are, how old they are, and where they are, but there's also information about what are the services and supports you're looking for either yourself living with disability or for a loved one in your family that you care for with disability. This survey is continuously available on the website, but it's also a survey that masjids and communities around the country that we work with, they are actually being asked to go ahead and share the findings share the survey so that people can, put in their responses. So with that, MUHSEN is nationwide. We work with about 70 communities across the country. We have people from around the globe reaching out to us, but predominantly I'll be discussing the American Muslim community today. And we would like to just jump into the next slide and share. If we can go to the slide.
if you give us 1 second,
Sure.
I'm actually asking Kat to share our slides because my internet is unstable, and
Sure.
so you were freezing. Oh,
Oh,
okay. I'm gonna do it. These technical things are always so. Are you able to see the slides?
it says that you've started the screen sharing, but the slide is not up. I don't see the slide.
Okay, let me try one more time. Please bear with me. It has just totally disappeared. You can't see now, right? There's, okay. I don't know what's going on. Okay, let me just try one more thing. Please, okay. Here we are. Okay, everyone see that? Great. I will just go to present and we'll be all set.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So essentially what I wanted to jump right into was we have actually now over 1,200 respondents to this particular survey that Mohsen has put out, our needs survey. And it's important to note that we kind of broke down by type of disability, and 67% of the respondents actually reported their family to have someone with a developmental disability. And that can be defined as that would include autism and Down syndrome, intellectual disability. These are the types of disabilities that you hear about so much in every community, and Muslims are no different. I just want to share a statistic that autism, according to the CDC, is now at a rate of 1 in 54 children are diagnosed with a form of autism. Down syndrome is 1 in 700 births. So back to what Dalia was saying at the beginning, the numbers are staggering. This is a very large number of people, whether or not we see them in our communities. And with that, I want to talk to the next slide, which takes us a little bit to the geographics of where our study saw responses coming from. So again, as I mentioned, it's nationwide, and we do have about 9 chapters around the country where Mohsen predominantly works with multiple states. However, 9 chapters, which are clusters of communities that are even more active. This is no surprise either to see that California, Illinois, and Texas had the highest number of respondents to the Mohsen survey. Again, high populations of Muslims living in these areas, as you will probably find in most research. What's very interesting here is Mohsen was born and headquartered in Illinois, in Chicago, which is actually where Mohsen is headquartered now, where I'm based. However, we had a very high number of respondents in Texas also, and in California. My co-founder, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, is obviously based in Texas, but this is where the community is really speaking out. And a close fourth outside of that was New Jersey. New Jersey was another state where we had a lot of responses. And the last thing I'm going to say about this geographic distribution is that outside the US, a huge number of responses are coming in from Canada, UK, and Ethiopia. People in these areas are reaching out to Mohsen. They have found Mohsen, and people are looking for supports and services even outside the American Muslim community. With that, I want to jump to the next slide where we talk a little bit, and this may be a little strange to look at, but we're saying here that in our study and in our findings, 65% of people living with disabilities who answered the Mohsen survey are under the age of 18. This is a very, very young population. A lot of parents and caregivers took the study and took the time to put in their responses. So I am not equating this to the statistics around the country for people living with disabilities, but I'm simply saying that MUHSEN study garnered this response that 65% of people who took the survey in here were the age bracket that was asked of them, it was under the age of 18. Again, the Muslim population in America is a very young population. Another factor is that the idea of community inclusion and better inclusion at the mosque level, and weekend school programming and those types of things that MUHSEN stands for, a lot of that also appeals, it skewed more towards a younger audience and younger families. And so I do want to say also 44% of people who identified as living with disability were male. In our study, 44% are male and 22% have multiple disabilities. So not only are they living with one disability, but they have multiple diagnoses. So that's important to know also about American Muslims living with disability. The next slide will tell you a little bit about what people are asking for. We have had asked across the board, and we had broken it out into different types of supports that people would look for, different types of accommodations that people would look for at the mosque level, at the community level. And I don't want people to think that everything that MUHSEN does has to be centered around the masjid or the place of worship. However, we do have, accommodations at community events, at fairs, at dinners, at conventions, at classes, seminaries. So you name it, wherever the Muslim population is where we would be willing to accommodate and support. In regards to support groups, 76% of respondents, these caregivers or individuals, they said that they would be interested in a support group. That's huge for a community that generally is known for having a lot of stigma about living with disability. The support groups that MUHSEN has offered in the past have been in person as well as virtual, and we would have typically a licensed professional, a mental health counselor, a family therapist, a social worker who would facilitate the group. However, it would be open discussion for people to discuss their challenges and resources and really build that network together. So 76% of these families came out and said, yes, I would attend a support group and I want to meet other families just like ours, which is, I think, wonderful that people want to come out and kind of put the past behind us where we used to hide these diagnoses, but actually come out and come together. The next slide I want to talk about, it was a very telling slide, and the difference between the research I think that ISPU has done and has put out, where we are talking about, how people are feeling accommodated in the community of disability. We drill down, we speak specifically to Muslims. And so this could look a little bit different than, across the whole American community of people living with disabilities. When we asked on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst and 10 being the best, family members' acceptance in the community, it was a 6.5 out of 10. So it was just over moderate. And when we asked a family member's accessibility to masjid-related events, just over half of them said, all of them over the range said from 1 to 10, I'd rate it about a 5, 5.5. So just basically, a little over 50%. I'm able to access masjid-related events, but this is not something where I'm feeling like we're all the way there. So this is what we look at, and then we ask, what kind of accommodations do you want? Do you need sign language? Do you need a Braille Quran? Do you need specialized childcare? And we'll get into some of these things later, because again, as I mentioned, being a grassroots organization founded to support these people, we didn't just want to talk. We wanted to know specifically and then cater our services to exactly what the families were asking for. I do want to take you to just something to add into this, to enrich this discussion. There actually was another study, a very small study, and I preface this by saying it was a very small study done by the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition in partnership with Marquette University. I was invited to share as they released the study and share some of my thoughts on it. So I had wanted to bring this to the forefront since there are so few studies done in the area of disability. So I wanted to share. They were done interview style. It was, people were allowed to remain anonymous, but the respondents were female, majority, 79%. The study took place 2018 into 2019. The majority of respondents are married, 70%. They have children, 89% of them have children, and 71% of them are employed. And they reported, as Muslim women, that they experienced discrimination. 81% of them in this survey said that they had experienced discrimination towards a family member with disability. This is staggering. This, when I heard this was staggering. We did not at Muhsen ask the participants or the respondents if they had faced any kind of discrimination, but we certainly, were alarmed to see this number, and we were saddened by it, because that meant that people had incidents that were less than pleasant, and these people, were having trouble accessing the community. I do want to say that, the key themes in what people talked about were stigma. They talked about culturally responsive resources. What does that mean? That means that someone needs to understand my culture, my religion, what my lens is before they can give me a resource. So for example, coming into the mosque with a young male that you're a caregiver for is going to work for only so long. When that young male grows up into a young man, that young man will no longer be able to be with you in the mosque in the women's section. So this is something that is part of our deen, part of our culture in most mosques. And so these are things that people need to understand about community access into disability, for the world of people living with disability. Inclusivity and uncertainty about caregiving was also mentioned as a theme in that study, meaning what happens after I can no longer be a caregiver for this individual? These are questions I ask myself every day as a parent. You have to have that firm belief that your community and your family and your friends are all going to gather and step up and fulfill the role of the sunnah, essentially, of being able to care for these individuals when you no longer are able to. And that has been also a huge part of our work going forward. And at the onset of the launch of the organization, we talked about planting seeds for the future of this population. And I'd just like to share, I believe it's my last slide before we get to the amazing other panelists that we have here. And the last slide talks about the supports that were actually requested. If we can move to the next slide, please. The supports that were requested by respondents who are looking for Muhsen to help out in the community. One of those supports is the support groups that I already spoke about. And during the pandemic, these were exceptionally well attended because people were at home and they could sign on online, from home. And there was a lot of comfort there in building these networks and support groups. People are looking for access to programs and classes. Like I mentioned, if I want to go to a class or I want to go to a conference, what would I do? I would, need someone to take over caregiving duty for my child, because I would not be able to access the class perhaps with that individual. Perhaps I'm someone who needs a transcriber to take notes. Perhaps I'm someone who needs sign language to process the information. So that's access. There was a need to have access to Islamic education. And a lot of families have asked for weekend school programs. I'm really, really, really proud of the team to say that we have mashallah, 16 or 17 weekend school programs now across the country for children with special needs. We were also asked for open houses or like social events. So you'll see Mohsen doing a lot of social activity for these families to come out of isolation, to be able to meet one another, to be able to meet the community at large. And then when there are events that do not seem conducive to having their loved one with special needs, well, we need to have a care option, whether you're an adult or a child, and Mohsen provides those care options for those individuals. So this is just to show you that the research is there, the study is there, but at the same time, the programs are being built to match what the requests are. So alhamdulillah, we're really glad to be doing that work, and we're really happy to have been included in the discussion here today, and I look forward to the rest of it. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. Thank you so much.